So let's talk about divorce. Divorce is this really scary thing, and you always sort of wonder whether or not you're actually doing the right thing, if you're actually making the right decision. And there's this looming sense of fear around it. And the subconscious mind plays into why we choose the partners we choose and how we navigate those relationships in such a big way that I think this is a really important topic. And I'm really going to share why my divorce was the absolute worst thing for me and the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. And it's not like people just decide to get divorced and then all of a sudden they're free and everything's great. It doesn't work like that. And there is a serious process that needs to happen, not only in reflecting about what you've learned or how you've grown or changed, but what you are and aren't doing with your subconscious mind in the process. So I want to dive into that. If you're new here, I'm Ketra Thompson, and I'm a certified master hypnotist and a relationship coach. So what I do is I help my clients go back on a subconscious level so they can reframe their subconscious beliefs that are driving their decisions and create a new operating system so that you really can have the life and the love that you want. So if you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description below. You can check that out. And you can also set up a completely complimentary consultation call so we can chat and I can get a better understanding of what you're dealing with and make my best recommendations so you can set that up there. So today I'm going to be a little different with this. I'm going to just really tell my story. And then I'm going to wind into that, what you can do to learn from my story and what you can do to deal with these issues in your subconscious mind. So I was married when I was 19, pretty young. I was married to the person I dated right out of high school, and I was pregnant, and it really changed the course of my life. But it was also an incredibly important part of my life. So I ended up having 3 children, 3 boys, and I was married for 17 years. And for the most part, that was a really fairly functional marriage. We actually were a great team. We worked together. We grew up together. And we navigated caring for our children and coaching teams and church activities and all of these things. But there was a lot that we didn't know, and there was a lot that we were operating on that was subconscious. And so there was a lot of assumptions that I made, and I really tried to fit us into a mold. We were, fairly new but dedicated Christians. At age 20, I became a Christian, and we were seemingly moving in the same direction. But what we didn't realize is that there was a lot of programming and beliefs that we were suppressing in order to move in this new direction together that hadn't been dealt with, hadn't been discussed, and we just didn't have the self-awareness to even know that this stuff was going on underneath the surface. And so I didn't really know the authentic me. I knew parts of me. I knew the creative part of me and the nurturing, loving part of me and things that were actually me. But what I didn't know is that I was putting myself in a box that didn't really allow for my full expression and full authenticity as well. And the same thing happened to my then husband. He was putting himself in a box of maybe not what he really wanted. He was kind of the person who always wanted to live in a big city and have a different kind of life. And here we were in a very, living the family life, the church life, having a beautiful home, building our lives. And a lot of it, I think, was stressful. And I didn't really realize how I was being deprived emotionally of depth, because there was some depth and there was some good teamwork and there was some good connection. And I didn't realize that I wasn't receiving some of the things I needed. And I don't think he was either. And I don't think we knew enough to reflect on how we were feeling and communicate that well, because let's face it, nobody teaches you those things. You just kind of navigate it on your own. There's no class. There's no preparation, really. You're taking what you've been programmed with subconsciously, and you're taking it into marriage. And so this marriage ended in a very unexpected and abrupt way, where he had actually taken some antidepressants, not knowing that he had some bipolar tendencies where if you take an antidepressant, it keeps you from getting depressed, but it doesn't keep you from going absolutely manic. And when he did go manic, he cheated and had all these affairs and all of this stuff. Well, I ended up staying a couple of more years to try to put everything back together, thinking that was my duty as a Christian woman and as a mom and all of these things to try to work that out. And I still don't regret that because I was able to leave with the knowledge that I had done everything that I could. But when he, went off his meds again and cheated again, that was it for me. And I found myself grieving profoundly. And what I didn't realize at the time is how many childhood wounds and childhood subconscious programs had been triggered by this happening. Now, I want you to realize that subconscious programming is happening basically from birth to age 7. We are in the theta brainwave state. So we are in the hypnotic state, programming our subconscious mind. And then around 7, the critical factor gets into place and kind of locks that down. So there are things that can happen in our adult life that are traumatic or complex trauma that can also affect our subconscious mind. But a lot of the programming is done prior to the age of 7. And because of that, there are a lot of belief systems that are so strongly rooted. And the one thing that I really believed when I got married was this: no one's going to love me as much as this person, because that's really what he demonstrated. And for him to cheat in this marriage and to go this other direction left me a crumbled, shattered mess, more so than maybe some, because my dad and mom got divorced when I was 5. So not only did they get divorced, which I don't think is the main issue, he then had to move across the country for work for 5 years. And so I had this dynamic where I didn't have this person in my life. I couldn't get to him. I felt abandoned. Even if it wasn't his fault, it didn't matter, because my subconscious programming was feeling scared and afraid and alone and needing this dad in my life, who, by the way, is a good man. And you don't have discernment when you're young. You don't have the ability to look at a situation and say, oh, I bet they didn't mean that, or I understand this is the way it needs to be. You really don't. You just know that it's hurting you and a need is going unmet. And then on top of that, to not have a really wonderful co-parenting situation between my dad and my mom. I had a stepmom who was really did not like my mother, and I'm not sure if it ever really liked my brother and I. And it created this dynamic where he became even more unreachable. And what happened at the end of my marriage triggered all of that. And so not only was I devastated by the shock of not believing that this person who I thought was one way was actually another way, I was also being re-traumatized by all of the rejection, perceived rejection and abandonment that happened in my childhood. And so I literally would put my kids to bed at night, tuck them in, do all the things, and then I would go get in the shower in my bathroom, lay on the shower floor in a fetal position and sob and cry. Because it was the one place I felt like I wasn't being a burden to anyone else. No one else could hear me cry. I wasn't putting that on someone else. And I was absolutely in this place of feeling unlovable and unwanted. And so having triggered all of those childhood things, I felt like at that time I didn't have much of a sense of self to stand on, because the sense of self I had been building for 17 years was crumbled because it was based on things that are no longer in existence and a belief of worth that felt demolished with those behaviors. And so I really didn't heal from that. I didn't have the resources to heal from that. And I found myself really scared, but I knew I couldn't stay. So I made this is sort of the first leap into making this decision of, this is not okay. I cannot live like this. I can't wonder if this person's going to be faithful. And I don't even know that I know this person anymore the way that I once thought I did. And so divorce felt like really an absolute must. I could not go on. And I didn't know what I was going to do, and I didn't know how I was going to manage. And I was a stay-home mom at the time. And I went back to work, but, at the time, my ex ended up moving across the state. So notice that little repeat pattern. So I had 100% custody of my boys, which left me feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And when the weight of the world is on your shoulders, you're just thinking about survival. You aren't really in a relaxed state to heal, to get clarity, any of that. So when we don't have the ability to have the help healing and the support we need, we end up making decisions based on the survival mode. And that landed me in a second short marriage. Now, this person checked all of my boxes on paper and, was the Christian that went to church and all the things. Those were my deal breakers back then. And what I didn't know is that I was getting into a very toxic situation. And honestly, it is the most horrific situation I've ever been in. And it is the thing that has catalyzed me into growth more than anything else. Like, it has absolutely forced me into growth. And so what happened is I got remarried, and we hadn't even left the wedding venue yet when everything changed. He had thrown my bouquet at me, breaking it apart, was giving me the silent treatment for hours and hours and hours on end, I think up to 5 hours that first time when everything kind of blew up. And it proceeded to continue being this way, very narcissistic style behavior. And I really had not experienced anything like that before. I had experienced the pain of betrayal and all of the betrayal trauma, but I had not experienced someone who would purposely pick fights for no reason, someone who had a silent narrative going on in their head, constantly finding fault with me, picking fights over nothing, or acting like I didn't exist, giving me the silent treatment, distance making, rejection, nitpicking, it never ended. There were moments where he would want to be close and kind and say the right things, and that wouldn't last very long. Sometimes it only lasts a couple hours, sometimes it would only last a day or so. And I really found that what happened is we do end up attracting based on where we are emotionally and mentally at that time. So at that time, I was very broken, and I created more rejection in my life because I already felt rejected. I already felt unworthy, unlovable, not enough. And I was already in such a broken place. That made me incredibly vulnerable and a target for someone who wanted a doormat of a partner, to be a nanny for their children, a housekeeper in their house, a porn star in the bedroom, whatever those things are, and to treat in an inhumane way. And so if I had been in my more normal, confident state when I felt, really safe and settled in who I was, I probably wouldn't have attracted a person like that, and I wouldn't have been blind to a few of the small red flags that were there. Not that I could have known to the extent that I was about to experience this awful behavior, but where we are ends up attracting the people into our lives that may or may not be so great for us. And so that's why it really matters where we are in our emotional state, and that is dependent on our subconscious programming, because our subconscious programming is really running the show, controlling over 95% of everything we think, feel, and do. And if it's running the show and our subconscious has all these limiting beliefs, then we're probably going to draw more of that into our life. So you can probably see at this point that divorce in both cases for me has been a very difficult decision, but also a very life-changing decision. And so it really forced me to learn. This relationship had gotten me at a very broken state. And so it wasn't loving and nurturing. It was just more destruction, more tearing down of a person who had already been shattered. So we were married in February. By August of that year, I had pneumonia. I had gone through extensive testing with therapists and was told I had clinical depression. I eventually, another couple years into that, got a massive cortisol imbalance where it took me 3 doctors to find out what was going on with me. I had stressed so much that I had no cortisol left in my body. And that means I had been just flooding my body with cortisol every single day, walking on eggshells, to the point where I couldn't even produce enough anymore. I wasn't making any. I gained weight. It was just miserable. And so along with this kind of dynamic, we think, oh, I can just tough it out. I can get through it. I can fix this. Comes the fix it mentality. Well, the confusion and the cognitive dissonance between behaviors and words not matching, or the inconsistency, I had really given my power away. And I had moved to another town. I had sold my home. I had done all of these things to go all in this marriage that was now destroying me in every way. And all the time I was betraying myself because I was trying to accommodate this other person and what they wanted from me. So my old programming kicked in of trying to fix this, trying to solve the problem, trying to, if I can just figure this out, then everything will be okay. I was over-explaining. I was choosing the best time to have conversations of things that needed to be addressed. I was tiptoeing around, trying to not start a fight, trying to not trigger some bad reaction toward me. I was walking on eggshells all the time. And what's interesting is I started devouring information on emotional abuse. Reading book after book after book. I stopped counting around 600. I'm way over 1,000 at this point. I have no idea how many books I've read. All nonfiction. This is all information, psychology stuff. And I really started to understand that this was not about me. And so, for example, what I did on a couple of occasions where there were some things that I would have believed and argued for a stance, like on stance A, let's call it. And then this is a topic he would have typically argued stance B. So I would argue for A, he would argue for B. And I decided I would flip that. And I would start saying, yeah, you're right. Stance B is correct. I do believe that. And I would start arguing for B. What I found is that this kind of person then starts arguing for A. They don't care about their stance. They're playing devil's advocate, and they want to argue more than they want to do anything productive. They want to create distance. And so once I had some realization about what that, it was helpful, but it didn't help my subconscious programming that was still telling me that I could fix it, that I could overfunction, I could over-explain, I could, demand that he get help, which I did demand, but it never did any good because he didn't actually want to change. And so I had to choose myself at this point, even if it meant losing everything. I really realized that it was absolutely imperative that I choose myself when I started thinking that it would be easier for me to die than to continue this way. Thinking it would be easier for me to drive off a bridge than it would be for me to keep going through life day in and day out with this person. And it was very difficult because all the time I was in fight or flight pushes the blood out of the frontal lobe of your brain into your large muscle groups, preparing you to run or to fight or whatever. But when you never leave fight or flight, you get brain fog. You're not thinking as clearly. You aren't rested. You're not in a state of clarity. And so even though I had this awareness, it was still a very difficult decision to make. But I realized I could not go on living like this. I have people I love in my life. I have children. I can't do that to them. And I certainly can't keep betraying myself. And that is at the heart of this. When you choose to leave something, even when you really, really don't want to, it has to come from that place of deciding that you are no longer going to betray yourself. That's what's happening when you're putting your needs aside, when you aren't willing to walk away. And so there was a time in my life where I thought that divorce was this awful, awful, terrible thing, and the failure was divorce. But in reality, the failure is staying in a place that requires you to betray yourself over and over and over, making yourself smaller and more insignificant and have less of a voice. And that is the betrayal. So I firmly believe there is success in learning to choose to not betray yourself. There aren't many things in life that can push us to leap off of a cliff in desperation And this is one of them, where I could not go on living this way. I was doing everything I could think to do. I was trying so hard, yet I was still more alone in that marriage than I ever was by myself. And not only was I alone, but I was being squashed into insignificance, being unloved, unappreciated, unseen, unknown, ignored, and attacked. So never knowing quite which version of this person I was going to get. Not physically attacked, but emotionally. So I did everything. I requested that he get help. We went to specialists all over the country, emotional abuse specialists, narcissistic specialists, people who'd been on Oprah. I did all of their spousal programs along with him doing his stuff. I had my own therapist. I did EMDR. I did all of these things, but it doesn't change anything. It gives you a little awareness. You learn some stuff, but it, first of all, doesn't make your partner change. And secondly, it doesn't take away your subconscious programs that are keeping you stuck, that are keeping you in fear, because fear is what really keeps you stuck. And so I really had to decide to do something different. And I did end up hiring a hypnotherapist that really did help me deal with these deep internal issues, the old childhood programming, and allowed me to actually move forward. And it doesn't mean I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't paralyzed in that fear anymore, if that makes sense. So it is truly one of the best things that ever happened to me, forcing me to choose myself, forcing me to start over in life in my 40s with almost nothing. Forcing me to look at myself and realize who I am, what I want, what's meaningful to me, and to move in a direction of building that for myself. I was no longer just doing this for children. My children were pretty big. My youngest was only home, I think, 2 years before he went to college after that divorce. So I now had to not let that excuse of taking care of other people be the defining thing for me. Because that had always been, I need to put them first. I need to think of them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what's wrong with it is if you allow that to keep you from tuning into yourself and your own needs and addressing those needs in a really healthy way. Now, allowing myself to get the hypnotherapy work that I needed really did help rewire my subconscious mind. And that created so much more momentum and clarity than I could have ever imagined. So what can you do to actually bring yourself some more clarity, to decide about what you should or shouldn't do, whether this is a choice you should or shouldn't make, or maybe my story is just relatable to you? So I want to give you a few steps, though, that should help you. Now, one, I want you to ask yourself where you aren't using your voice. Where are you feeling, thinking, wanting to express things that you aren't saying because maybe you're afraid to rock the boat? That's a big indication that you are betraying yourself. Second, I want you to ask yourself, what does a healthy, fulfilling relationship actually feel like? Maybe what does it look like, but also what does it feel like? What does it feel like to be in the presence of someone who doesn't bite your head off, someone who doesn't react in an unexpected way? How does it feel to be allowed to be yourself? I have a really good example. I have a good friend who got out of a very toxic marriage, and in the next relationship she was in with her boyfriend, they were cooking dinner, and he had asked her to take out some kind of frozen meat from the freezer that morning and put it in the fridge. So when they got home to do the dinner, she pulls it out from the fridge, and he goes, "Oh no, this isn't what I wanted to use. I wanted ground beef," or whatever it was. She froze in that moment and got kind of teary-eyed and went into this panic mode because what she was used to was her ex-husband screaming at her, yelling at her, telling her, "Why did you do that? That was stupid. Now we can't even make dinner right," blah, blah, blah. All these attacks. And this person didn't do that, but it didn't mean that it wasn't still part of her unhealed subconscious programming. And so she kind of froze and eventually realized what was going on and did go back to explain to him, hey, here's why this happened. And we think we can rationalize our way out of these old patterns and beliefs, but it isn't a rationalization that works. Our body and our subconscious mind all has this deep memory, and so we need to reach that on a subconscious level so that we can make those changes. So first, ask yourself where you aren't using your voice. Second, Ask yourself what a fulfilling and safe relationship looks like and feels like. And the third thing you want to do, and this is a great journal prompt, is to ask yourself what good and bad traits does your partner have, or your past partners have had, that are also the good and bad traits that you grew up with. Now, sometimes we can see the good, and sometimes we can easily see the bad. But be really honest with yourself. How was your mom? How was your dad? How were your caregivers? In what situations? Did you feel supported? Did you feel heard? Were they curious about your feelings? Did they validate your experience? Were they patient and understanding with you, encouraging of you, helping guide you? All these things. Get really honest and maybe set a timer, 20-minute timer, and just write out what are the good and bad traits that my partner or partners have had that I grew up with. That's going to give you a ton of insight, because a lot of times we feel really comfortable in the environment that we grew up with. So if we grew up with no emotional availability, that can feel really comfortable. And I have to say, even though I have a very sweet, kind, loving dad that I have been somewhat estranged from because of stepmom dynamics, I guess, he wasn't truly really that emotionally available and not that emotionally connected to me. I then had a stepdad, good man, thoughtful, kind, supportive man, that was also one of the most emotionally unavailable people that I have ever known. And when we grow up with this, it feels normal. And then we don't know what to do with the opposite of that. And so we can subconsciously look for those things in our life if we don't deal with the subconscious programming. So, of course, the fastest way to deal with all of this is through custom hypnotherapy. And that's what I do with my clients. So I help them go back on that subconscious level and reframe those beliefs where they were formed, so that they have this new operating system moving forward, so they can feel connected to their self-worth, so other people's thoughts and opinions and judgments of them no longer define them or derail them or hit so deeply that they can't function. They might hurt a little, but they have such a deep understanding of their own self-worth that it does not derail them, and they certainly don't make concessions for allowing those kinds of people in their life. It doesn't mean you have to be an angry person. It just means you have to be able to know the truth about you so that you can actually implement the boundaries. We talk a lot about communication, but communication doesn't happen if someone's emotionally triggered. That's when it stops. And now you're projecting all the pain and defensiveness and old wounds onto the other person. And so you can learn all the tools you want about communication and boundaries, but you're not going to have a very easy time implementing them if your subconscious wiring is opposite of that. So what this did for me was it forced me, these devastating things in my life, forced me to learn how to reconnect to my own self-worth through the hypnotherapy process, and then boldly take those steps forward. And sometimes you don't know what those steps are going to be. You might know 1 or 2 steps. You don't know what 20 steps ahead is. So it feels very scary, but it's even more scary to try to do that if when you do it, you're going to fall back on your subconscious programming and make the same mistake again. Nobody wants that. So if you really want to get to the heart of the subconscious programming that has really been controlling your life, and set up that consultation call, and let's talk about what you're dealing with and what you actually want to experience in your life. So anyway, until next time, I hope you curate a life by your own design.